justice for Tom Harding and Canadians.
Harding and Labrie are not guilty. Free them now. Harding and Labrie are not guilty. Free them now.
I want everybody to understand that, as railroad workers, one of the things that we've been fighting for over 30 years is the reduction of crew sizes. When I hired out on the railroad, there were 4 men to every train. And we did everything we possibly could to be as safe as possible. Right now, they are running trains with just 1 person. That's true. By remote control in some cases. And in the particular case of this train in Lac-Mégantic, we had a situation where we had an engineer only. That's it. There were no other crewmen. There were no conductors. There were no brakemen. He had to handle this train all by himself. And he was forced to do this by the company. Okay, so what do? The train runs away, kills 47 people in Lac-Mégantic, and they blame him, right? Instead of blaming the MMA, the railroad company that put him in this particular situation. I am the legislative representative for an organization called NARV. That's the National Association of Retired and Veteran Railway Employees. We protect our retirement. I've been retired for about 5 years now. And what we did is we looked at this as a unit, and we said to ourselves, something's wrong here. In Sherbrooke, Canada, when the judge in this particular case, his name was Gaëtan Dumas, when he instructed the jury, he told that jury that MMA was not on trial here, just these men were. And that was his instructions to the jury. That's wrong. On a secondary note, in the last 2 months, we've actually had testimony in that trial, wherein in invoking engineer only, the only change that MMA made, the only change was to put a rear view mirror on the opposite side of the railroad cab for that engineer to be able to operate his train. Now, people will say, well, why did he operate the train that way? Why didn't he just quit? Well, you got a family, you've got children. The problem is when something terrible like this happens, is that why are you blaming the worker when you are actually supposed to be blaming the corporation and their poor safety culture? So what we've done as a unit of NARV is that we actually wrote to the Judge Gaëtan Dumas, and told him to declare a mistrial, that he gave improper instructions to that jury. We wrote that letter on October the 10th. And just now we went upstairs and to the Canadian Consulate, and we delivered that letter and asked them to forward it to the Canadian judicial system and to Judge Dumas, and also to look at all of the testimony that has occurred since October the 10th in that trial, and drop the charges against these 3 employees who are being held responsible for a piss-poor safety culture on the MMA Railroad, which is now defunct. And the owner of that railroad has fled the scene and bears no responsibility for what he created in the first place. So what we're asking is that the Canadian Consulate here look at the testimony in the trial in the last 2 months, join us, join NARV, join this demonstration, and say something's wrong here. The preponderance of evidence is surely to exonerate these employees. This trial should never go to the jury. The judge should review the evidence over that he's had 2 weeks of recess over the Christmas vacation to review the evidence that he himself is allowed to be put forward in this trial, and he should absolutely stop the trial and say that these men are not guilty. We're asking the Canadian Consulate here in 580 California Street in San Francisco to join us, and also tell the Canadian judicial system to tell Judge Dumas to turn this thing down and turn it off. There is no guilty here. There is no criminal negligence whatsoever on the part of the 3 employees of the MMA are being held responsible for this tragedy in Lac-Mégantic.
Stop scapegoating railway workers. Stop scapegoating the railway workers. Stop scapegoating the railway workers.
My name is Linda Ray, and I'm from SEIU 1021. and we have a Peace and Solidarity Committee, and I'm here representing that committee. Two things I want to say. I was a hospital worker and worked for the health department, and when we were short-staffed, it was really the responsibility of management, but if a person made a mistake or they couldn't get to everything, they could be held responsible. And and they were scapegoated for the fact that there wasn't enough staff to do the work. So I see this very similarly to that, and I think we all have, across the board, there's lean production, downsizing, trying to extract as much work as possible from each worker and then have more profits. Sometimes in the nonprofit world you kind of go, well, there isn't really profits or whatever, but it's kind of to make bosses look better that they can extract all this work and they seem more efficient. But workers always know how many workers they need to do the job. You can ask any worker, and they don't want 10 people when really all you need is 3, and they're really realistic about that. But one doesn't cut it. And on a personal note, my cousin Jimmy Campkin died as a railway worker for the Santa Fe Railway outside of Las Vegas, Nevada. He bled to death after being injured. What happened is they went from 3 people, and he was a brakeman, down to 2. And so now when they talk about 1, you could see, my cousin unfortunately died way before his time as a worker. No worker should pay for their lives for their jobs, but this whole town was destroyed, and the bosses just go skating by. I don't think in the case of my cousin anything happened. In fact, they cut down the crews more. So I consider it a criminal enterprise, some of these bosses and what they're doing to the working people here in America.
This rally today is not just about these railroad workers who have been framed up in Canada. It's about the collapse of health and safety on our transportation system, on our railroads. Why is it in the United States, the richest country in the world, we can't keep the trains running? We can't even get a bullet train running between San Francisco and Los Angeles. It's scandalous, and the rail accidents that have been taking place in this country have killed workers, they've killed railroad workers, but they've also harmed communities. There are railroad wrecks on a regular basis, and this is unacceptable, it's intolerable. And a real reason for this is deregulation. The railroad companies are basically in charge of regulating themselves. I know that Gerald Whitman, who's a federal OSHA investigator, has investigated the retaliation against whistleblowers, railroad whistleblowers. When railroad workers complain about the health and safety, they become the targets, they become the problem. And we're saying that has to change for the public, it has to change for all the people of this country. We need safe railroads, we need an end to this one-person crew. The idea that you can have a 70-car train with 1 person and not expect to have a wreck, not expect to have an accident is insane. That is the level of problems that we've got. We also have harassment and bullying of railroad workers, even transit workers. ATU workers here in TW workers here in San Francisco are harassed and bullied. They harass these workers, and then they expect that we're going to have proper health and safety conditions. This has to end. And our next speaker is Al Rojas. He's with the Labor Council for Latin American Advancement. He is also fighting for health and safety for the farm workers in Baja California, who also face horrendous conditions. So welcome, Al Rojas.
Well, on behalf of the Labor Council for Latin American Advancement, Sacramento, Northern California chapter, we're here in solidarity with those workers. We're on trial, and we have already heard from some of the speakers that this trial should not go on, that the Canadian government should take the position of a full and clear and thorough investigation as to what the elements of the facts and conclusions of what they find in order to really find what the problem was. And according to what we're hearing is that the corporations in this country do not care about working people and working families. They do not care about even passengers who may be on this train, or even some of the people who may have come on that train because they're homeless and they're looking for work, and they were workers at one time, and they get killed too. So there's a lot of impact here about what's happening here in San Francisco, here in this country, especially with this government who has on the whole high road of deregulation. Deregulation, making more profit. Now, in this building, if you take a look at that woman that's draped in that pink cloth over her, I asked the security, who in the hell is this person here? And he said, if you really want to know, it's to protect the corporations. Protect the corporations? What the hell do you mean? You know, I don't know. He says, I just work here, but all I know is that's up there, up in the top part of this building, also protecting the whole building and all the corporate people that work in this building, and also the Canadian Embassy, because they're here too. So I guess you can call them corporations too. So they're protected too because of our madam that's here. So I thought that was pretty significant of what they think about protecting workers versus a building. Well, all I can say is that we're in solidarity with the whole effort of bringing justice to these workers, and that there's equity in regards to the judicial system, and that people are given their right to due process, and at the same time, we support those workers. All workers, wherever they're at, in whatever part of the country. I know that we're talking about Mexico, South America, we're talking about now Canada, but even other countries throughout the world are feeling the pain and the attack by the corporations and the capitalist system. And let's look and face it really clearly. It's the capitalist system.
Drop the charges. Free the railroad workers now. Drop the charges. Free the railroad workers now. Drop the charges. Free the railroad workers now.
I'm Meg Phelps. I'm the secretary of the local committee for SMART Local 1741. I'm here with Doug to support our brother and sister union, and we're just here to show our support. We're part of their union now. We merged, and we just want to be here to say we're with you. We know well about how you need safe conditions for school bus drivers. So we're just here to support.
We have a railroad engineer here with us from the Southland, and I'm going to have him introduce himself and tell you how difficult it is to secure a train when you're an engineer only.
Thank you, Brian. My name is Hugh Sawyer. I'm a locomotive engineer. I operate out of Atlanta, Georgia, on a freight railroad. And I just want to talk about, several things, but let's start off with securing the train. It's impossible for one person to do it safely. You have to have an engineer in the cab applying the brakes. You have another man tie down the brakes, and then you do a brake test. The engineer knocks the brakes off and ensures that the brakes hold and what have you. And this is before we secure the locomotives, which are attached to that cut of cars. In a lot of cases, you're in sidings that have road crossings, and you can't block the road crossing, so you have to have that second man back, drop them off, let them make the cut, secure cut of cars on one side of the road crossing, make sure those brakes are holding, come over onto the other side of the road crossing and tie down the rest of the train. This was not an option up there. They did not have that option, so they could not park the train on a flat ground without a hill in a siding because they did not have anybody to make a cut on that train to make sure that road crossing was not blocked while it was tied down. So they ended up tying it down on a hillside, and through it's never one thing that causes an accident. It's always a collection of things, and that's just happened to be the one time out of 100 where a collection of things happened that allowed this train to roll by. And virtually all of these conditions were created by management of the MMA, and none of them were created by the worker, who was forced to do the best job that he could, and who, after the fact, heroically endangered his life trying to help remove cars that were exploding all around him and pull back as many as possible out of the conflagration. And it's just unbelievable that he's charged and not anybody out of management. I also want to state here in this country, labor costs in comparison to the profits that are made on railroads are so minuscule it's not even worth talking about. And yet we're always pushing to go. In my career, when I was training out there, I was a 6th member of a switching crew, and now we're down to 2, and in some cases just 1. And with technology coming along, we've all heard about positive train control. It's apparent to me that as soon as it's enacted in this country, that they intend on eliminating the conductors on the trains, and I'll be up there by myself. It'll be me and a computer. And I'm sure the day long after I'm gone will come where it'll be just the computers running. And it's a very, you'd have to be up there and operate these trains to know that the human touch to running these trains is absolutely critical. A computer's never going to do as good a job as a well-trained, that's key here, well-trained engineer and crew. Thanks.
My name is David Gassman. I live in Oakland, and I've been very active in the No Coal in Oakland campaign, which I hope everybody has heard about. As you may know, the plan is, which we're trying to stop and which is in federal court at the moment. There will be hearings the 10th and possibly a trial later this month, but the project is to build a coal export terminal which would involve mile-long coal trains coming from Utah and fairly clearly eventually other parts of the West to ship this coal overseas. And we intend to stop it, and the kind of disaster which happened in Lac-Mégantic could easily happen anywhere along the route from Utah, Montana, Wyoming, or right here under the Bay Bridge if this kind of thing happens, is allowed to continue. So I just wanted to bring it very close to home. Thank you. Our understanding is that over there,
Is it on?
I
Yeah,
don't-
it's on. It's on. Keep it.
that the bank, the financial institution behind the proposed coal export terminal in Oakland is also Canadian. It is the Bank of Montreal, which claims to have signed principles, the Equator Principles, which would prevent financing working on precisely such a project. So there's a Canadian aspect to the coal terminal, the proposed coal terminal right here in Oakland in the Bay Area at the base of the Bay Bridge.
There was a number of things that were wrong with the MMA. Number one, this whole tragedy would have happened had the MMA had a replacement engineer for Harding. Harding had to go get his arrest. Why wasn't there another engineer waiting above Lac-Mégantic to take over the train and take it further on down the road, instead of trying to have it sit in this siding until Labrie got his rest? Until Harding got his rest. And Harding, in particular, he's required to get his rest, just like all of us are. He can only work 12 hours. That's what it is for railroad workers. And that's to protect the public, not to protect us. It's to protect the public. And yet, the MMA could have easily have found a reserve engineer or somebody else to come and take over that train and not leave it parked as a sort of Damocles sitting above the city of Lac-Mégantic like it was that evening. So again, the issue is you're blaming the worker and you're not blaming the company that caused the conditions for this to happen. And that's one of the issues we're here for, and that's why we want the Canadian government and this Canadian consulate here in San Francisco to listen to our plea, have them join us, have them talk to the judiciary system in Canada, have them communicate with this Judge Gaetan Dumas and have him drop the charges. Declare a mistrial. There is no trial here. And it's pretty clear from the evidence that we have seen that the only thing, again, the only thing that this company, MMA, did to provide for engineer-only operations, which in itself is criminal, is to provide a rear view mirror on the conductor side of the engine so that the engineer could look across the cab and see what was going on that side of the cab. What else was there? I mean, if you read the testimony of this trial, some of the people have said that in terms of like safety, when you came to work on the MMA, there was nothing there. There were no bulletins to tell you what the slow orders were or anything else like that. They weren't in a booklet like they should be in accordance with safety procedures. They were strewn all over the office. What kind of safety culture is this? And what kind of conditions were Harding and his fellow employees required to work under? I feel very sorry for Harding and the fact that he had to feed his family and work on a railroad that was this seat-of-your-pants fly-by-night operation run by Burkhart. The problem again is that Harding is being held responsible for this, and the real responsibility, MMA, declared bankruptcy is out of the picture, and the Burkhart, the guy who was the head of it, is gone. He's probably living a high lifestyle somewhere, watching the trial from afar, maybe from a foreign country, maybe from an island in the Pacific or some other place, because he's got plenty of money. And it's true, like Hugh Sawyer had said, these railroads make a lot of money. 70 railroad cars filled with bulk oil from the oil fields, wherever they came from, probably North Dakota. The company pays thousands and thousands of dollars for each one of these rail cars to travel the distance it took to get them to the port. And this MMA was making money hand over fist, making this happen. And what was the engineer doing? Why were they operating with engineer only, with a single employee in the cab of a locomotive with no relief? To make money. It's all about profits. All about profits. And they are the ones that need to be held responsible. So we hope that the Canadian Consulate here and the Canadian government will look to this situation, have the judiciary perhaps advise Mr. Judge Gaetan Dumas to drop these charges, cancel this criminal trial against Harding, Labrie, and Desmarais.
We want to stop blaming the railroad workers. For instance, in the Washington State accident, recent accident, that engineer had very little training. He was not one of the regular engineers. It's a brand new run. They did not adequately train these workers for this route. And it's astounding to me that they had an extra board man running the train on their inaugural run. We also want to stop in the Lac-Mégantic situation. We want to blame the owner of that company whose policies directly caused that wreck, not the engineer-only crew that was on there who was prevented from parking that train where it should have been parked because he didn't have a conductor or a helper to make a cut on a road crossing. So management elected to park this train on a steep grade, and through a series of course it's never one thing, through a series of incidents that happened on that particular train, it was that 1 in 100 chance that it took off and went down there and blew up that town. And this is a direct result of management trying to squeeze profits and cut corners, and you just can't do that when you're dealing with these 1,000-ton trains, tens of thousands of tons in some case trains. You have to have a little bit of common sense in there. Labor costs are so minuscule in the whole equation that it's insanity that they're trying to make cuts there to the point of where it truly is unsafe for freight to move in Canada and sometimes in the United States.
Justice for Tom Hardy and Richard Labrie.
Justice for Tom Hardy and Richard Labrie.
Justice for Tom Hardy and Richard Labrie.
As you said, I mean, why haven't the government forced these companies in the United States to install this safety equipment? The question, you know, this rich country, these companies are making billions of dollars. Warren Buffett, you know, these owners are making billions of dollars, and they can't install proper safety equipment in these trains. They keep extending the time, and it's costing lives. It's costing lives of people in the community. It's costing lives of railroad workers, and that's why this rally here and solidarity with our brothers in Canada is not just about them, and they have to be freed. They have to drop the charges and free them. It's also about us here in the United States, a safe transit system, a safe transportation system. You know, in other countries in Europe and in Japan and Korea, they don't have the train wrecks like we have here. I mean, why is it a lot of this technology is developed in the United States, yet we're not being able to use it to protect people in this country? What is the reason? And the reason is profits. These companies are more interested in protecting their profits and cutting down on railroad workers than they are a safe transportation system. It's our view that the people who really should be on trial are these owners. The owners of the railroad system in this country are creating these accidents. They're not accidents, they're man-made disasters created for profits, for greater profits. They want to get rid of labor at all costs. And the cost is the cost of lives, the cost of people in the community. 47 people were killed in this accident. And yet the companies, in the evidence that has come out in the trial, they say that they didn't have safe situation. They say they cut back on safety. They say they cut back on labor. And yet they're blaming these railroad workers for this accident. It's a travesty, is really what it is, a complete travesty that these railroad workers are blamed for this disaster. So we're here, we're saying solidarity, and let's do it. Drop the charges, free the railroad workers. Free the railroad workers now. Drop the charges.